U.S. History Virtual Interactive Notebook 3. Day 1, Challenges after World War II. This is the Cold War unit. So the essential question for today is, what challenges faced Americans after World War II? The main idea is challenges, and the subtopics today, there are 3 of them, are women, the GI Bill, and the Fair Deal. And before we start, I want to remind you that when Japanese people were released from internment, they found that their property had been auctioned off illegally, unconstitutionally, and they had to rebuild their lives from nothing. And then in the 1980s, Ronald Reagan gave everybody who was still alive $20,000, which didn't really make up for it. It was more symbolic. But we covered that in... Oh, no, we didn't. We actually didn't cover that. Anyway, I want you to know that. Okay, so we're going to start with women. For the women subtopic, there was a big government effort to get women to go back home because the idea was there are all these soldiers demobilizing from the war, returning to the United States, and they would need jobs. And the women had taken the jobs that men had vacated when they went to fight. So when the men came home, the government wanted women to go back home. Something like 75 to 90% of women wanted to keep the job that they had during the war, but it seems like they went back home en masse. But by the end of the 1940s, women did make up 1/3 of the labor force, which means if you had 3 American workers in front of you, on average, one of them would be a woman, which was way up from 10%. I think it was 10% before. So for women, I want you to write down women now 1/3 of the labor force. And this will come with a lot of social change because women are making their own money, right? So they don't have to depend on a husband to make a living. Now, with that said, poor women had always worked, right? When we're talking about this, we're often referring to middle-class women, women whose husbands could afford a house and the basics of life, that kind of thing. So that's important to know. The second thing is a GI Bill. So when soldiers came back from World War I, Congress voted them a $500 bonus in 1945, which was meant to be a sort of retirement. When they came back from World War II, instead of doing that, Congress did 2 things. They called this bill the GI Bill of Rights, and it did 2 main things. It did other things, but we're going to focus on 2 things. The first thing is all soldiers coming back home got 1 year of unemployment. So if they couldn't find a job, the government would pay them a wage while they were looking for 1 full year. The second thing it did was soldiers who wanted to go to college for free could do it. So 2 million soldiers got a free college education. So I want 2 things for GI Bill. 1 is they got 1 year of unemployment when they came back from the war. And 2, they got free college, and 2 million Americans took advantage of that. When they did, colleges had this massive wave of 21-year-old college students, many of whom had families. That's what caused the baby boom, right? Soldiers came back from the war, there's no birth control, so they generally get married and start having kids right off the bat. Colleges coped with this, many of them did, by buying a new thing called the Airstream trailer. Aircraft technology in World War II was aluminum skin over a steel frame. That's how they made aircraft. Well, they started cranking out Airstream trailers like this because they're light and strong. So colleges bought a bunch of Airstream trailers and just set them up in instant trailer parks on athletic fields. And for 4 years, ex-service personnel and their families lived in these things and got their degrees. And then they took off. Now, when the colleges exited all these people, they had all these surplus Airstream trailers, so they sold them off cheap. And you get the Airstream boom of the 1950s. You could get yourself a cheap Airstream trailer and start touring the world. Touring the world? Well, touring North America anyway. Finally, we're going to go to the Fair Deal. So Franklin Roosevelt had his New Deal programs. Truman continued that idea of government programs having a name with the Fair Deal. So remember, Theodore Roosevelt had the Square Deal, and then Franklin Roosevelt had the New Deal, and Truman had the Fair Deal. We want to know 3 things for our purposes about the Fair Deal. 1, Truman desegregated the armed forces. World War II was the last war in which there were specifically black units. So there were black artillery units, black tank units, etc. From what I can tell, Hispanics served with white units. Japanese American soldiers served in all Japanese units and African Americans served in all black units. And I believe that Latinos legally were white, and so they served in white units. Not that they got equal representation in the Southwest, but we've covered that. Okay, so 1, he desegregated the armed forces. 2, he created the Presidential Committee on Civil Rights. I want you to write that whole thing down. Write Presidential Committee on Civil Rights. This is not a Civil Rights Act, but this committee did investigate discrimination in government institutions. Finally, 3, he tried for national health care, but he didn't get it. So he tried to use public money to give everybody essentially free health care. It's not really free. Somebody pays for it, but we would tax and borrow to pay for this program. And that did not happen. Congress was a mix of the dominant force in Congress were Republicans and conservative Southern Democrats, and they didn't like that idea. And to this day, conservatives tend not to like the idea of national health care because they generally the argument is that it's inefficient because it's a government organization, so prices are sky high, and people have to be on huge waiting lists, so the quality of care decreases, is a conservative argument. Generally, the progressive argument is it doesn't, and they consider healthcare to be a moral right. I'm not telling you what to think either way. I'm just summarizing the two views quickly. For today's output, I want you to view a video, and I've linked to it, that talks about Great Britain after World War II. Great Britain did something after World War II, and the question is, what did they do concerning healthcare? And I want you to answer it with pictures, not words. So view the video and answer this question on your output side with pictures and not words. Thank you very much, and I'll see you tomorrow for day 2.